we've seen the importance of habitus, of dispositions. Where do they come from? How do they get developed? As far as things like health are concerned, some health comes from within, from what you might call our natural constitution. We are more robust or less robust because of our genetics, we would say. Some will come from without, for example, from medical care or the right kind of diet. But we're more interested in dispositions of the mind, of the intellect, of the will, of the emotions. Those are more important morally. So as far as dispositions of the mind, of the intellect are concerned, then being an Aristotelian, St. Thomas insists that we have to acquire the concepts we use through the senses, through our interaction with the world, through our conversations and so on. But there are certain innate dispositions, something a bit like built-in structures to the mind, so that the principle of non-contradiction is just built into us. We can't think that the same thing is true and false at the same time. And there are other innate habits of thinking. We have to learn the concept of whole and the concept of part, but as soon as we have those concepts, we can see that the whole is greater than any of its parts. And the same is true with moral thinking, in fact with the innate springs of the natural law. We have an inbuilt habit of synderesis, Thomas calls it, where it's obvious, once we have the concepts of good and evil, that we must do good and avoid evil. So there's a certain inbuilt kind of dynamic or structure of thinking, of a very basic kind in our intellect. But of course, a great deal of knowledge has to be acquired in a learning process. And I think it's implicit in St. Thomas. It's part of his medieval context that learning is very much a cooperative process with teachers to whom you are, so to speak, apprenticed. And that will come up again when we look at the acquisition of virtues and even of faith. As far as dispositions of the will, of the emotions, of our affective faculties are concerned, then St. Thomas thinks there are inbuilt dynamics, so to speak, in our affective faculties, dynamics towards the good. Our emotions, if you like to call them that, are automatically directed towards the limited but real goods at the sensory level to which they are attuned. And the will is automatically directed towards the good, towards eudaimonia, as Aristotle would put it, beatitudo, fulfillment, well-being, flourishing. We can't help but want to be happy. We have to decide what we think makes us happy. But St. Thomas thinks that those inbuilt dynamics in the affective faculties are too much part of the natural dynamism of those faculties to be any kind of disposition. He allows some, what you might call personal chemistry, because of our bodily constitution, we might say brain structure and hormone balance and so on. People can be better or worse at being temperate. Someone might be born with an addictive personality or whatever. But a huge amount of our dispositions, of our affective faculties, are formed in the course of the moral life. That's why it's so important to consider the formation of habits, dispositions in our affective faculties. Habits are typically built up by acts. We practice playing the piano and become good at it. We practice touch typing and get used to it. We get used to various jobs and techniques. And importantly for Aristotle and Aquinas, that is also true for the moral life. We build up moral virtues, as we'll see, by acts. And typically at the human level, our habits are preserved by practice. If we stop playing the piano, the skill at playing it will diminish. Sometimes one powerful act can build up or destroy a habit. You might have the intellectual habit of holding a certain opinion, and then you hear one absolutely convincing argument against it, and you change your opinion. We might perhaps reflect today on the interaction between St. Thomas's account of building up habits and destroying them, and what you might call the psychology of addiction, and so on. There's plenty to be investigated there. And then St. Thomas thinks that certain dispositions can be infused by God, caused directly by God, like prophetic inspiration, where sometimes certain ideas come into the mind directly from God. And grace and charity can only come from God, though they typically do so, so to speak, embedded in the whole life of conversion and discipleship, which is cooperative, involving the Church. And we'll have to see a lot more on that when we come to discuss the moral virtues.